every rugby league game of all time ranked. A lot of you guys who specifically watch the YouTube videos have probably seen for a while. I've tried uploading rugby league gaming content in the past, but it's just not too great. So I thought it was a bit of a compromise because some of you have been asking for rugby league gaming content for a little while, that instead what I'd do is I'd rank every rugby league video game. Couple of rules. First one is I will be ranking console games. I know there's a lot of stuff out there. The second one is I won't be ranking anything that came before Rugby League, as in the game Rugby League, because I've not really played those games. And to be honest, you know, the EA games, the ARL, 92s, 95s, 96s, it's just because I didn't really play those games that much, and I feel like they're sort of very different to the more modern era console games. So I will be ranking every game from Rugby League, which came out in 2003, to Rugby League Live 4, which came out in 2017. Also, no World Cup editions. If there was a World Cup edition for a certain game, I will include that in the original game, if you get what I mean with that ranking. But anyway, without any further ado, here is every Rugby League video game ranked. Another quick rule before we start. With Rugby League games in particular, I am heavily a career mode player, which I think most people would be just based on how these Rugby League games are designed. So a heavy influence is going to be how good the career mode was, but I will be taking into account gameplay, visuals, etc. But we're going to kick things off. Now, there is one Rugby League game that I really don't like. I've got 7 on this list here. 6 of them I can sort of hack. There is one of them that I hate, and that comes in at number 7. Rugby League Live came out in 2010. Well, I spoke about career mode. This one didn't have one at all. Rugby League 10 really sort of honed in on its creative suite and the options you could do creating a player or a team. Now, that's all well and good, but that's sort of not in my domain, and for a lot of players I don't think it would be either with a Rugby League game. Sure, in other types of games, other genres, creative suites are very important and are integral to how good a game is. But I don't think it is for a Rugby League game, let's be honest. True Blue would go on to keep the options they did for their creative suites, but would add back in a career mode, etc. So the games would be better for it and benefit for it. I'm glad they did keep those creative suites, especially when creator player career modes came in. But for Rugby League Live, it wasn't great. The one good thing I could say is the big hit feature, where if you put a big hit on someone, there would be a certain cinematic animation for it. But other than that, it wasn't great. Put it this way, on most Rugby League games, at least for Rugby League Live 4, my sort of challenging level is veteran. Now, I think that's either the second highest or third highest level you can get. And that's the same with most games, if not semi-pro. I'm at least on the third level for most Rugby League games. With Rugby League Live, I noticed I was flogging teams on the easy mode, but when I'd go up by one level, I'd start getting flogged. Now, maybe that's just me being a crap player, but if on other Rugby League games I'm doing a lot better and can at least be competitive, on higher levels there is something wrong with the competitive difficulty here. I really don't think that Rugby League Live is that good of a game that you can play for days on end, let's say. Even if you do put it away for a few months, a game that when you get it back out, you can play it for days on end. You can maybe play it for a day, maybe go through a competition mode as a team and sweep through that. But that's it for the very most. Maybe 1 to 2 games you can get out of it. It's not a game that you are going to be playing for very long, for a prolonged period. For that reason, coming in last, coming in at 7th, I've got Rugby League Live. Coming in at 6th, now I can hack this game mainly because of the gameplay and just how fun it was to play. It's the original for at least the PlayStation console games. It's 2003's Rugby League. Now, This one I don't think had a career mode either, however you had more options to play with than Rugby League Live. For whatever reason, the first installment in a Rugby League gaming franchise just seems to not have a career mode. That's what limits it for me. One of the big highlights, well, the sending offs, the high tackles. You could literally, one of the animations was you could literally RKO someone. A high tackle was literally an RKO. If you go back and play Rugby League today, no joke, if you put a high tackle on someone, 80% of the time, the animation is an RKO. That's cool. There were also visible referees, which wouldn't come back for a couple of years in the franchise, and there were audible referees, which wouldn't come back for a while. I believe Bill Harrington, oh my goodness, I have stuffed up one of the legendary referees' names, if not the legendary referee, Bill Harrigan. My apologies. He voiced the referee character in this game, and of course, if you were sent off for 10, alright, you're off. It was the iconic line, and this is where Andrew Voss also sort of started to come through with his famous lines for these Rugby League games. Not quite there yet, but started to come through. Rugby League 2 was a natural progression. We'll get to that game eventually, but this set a nice little foundation. It was a fun game to play, and the reason why it's not last and it's still fun to play for a while is because of the gameplay itself. It was sort of just a fun game to play. Up next in 5th we have Rugby League Live 3. Now this is a bit contentious because I know a fair few people have Rugby League Live 3 above Rugby League Live 4. One came out in 2015, one came out in 2017. They are essentially the same game. True Blue really did not change much other than one thing, and it's one thing that has Rugby League Live 4 above Rugby League Live 3. Well, Rugby League Live 3, the graphics, at least for players, were terrible. Worse than in the earlier games. In the earlier games, they would come up with a mock-up of a player, but at least you could tell which player it was. At least they had a semblance of who it was in real life. This game, no one looked like the player in real life. They maybe had the same colour hair and maybe around the same hairstyle, but that was about it. No one actually looked like the real life player, and that is the big difference. The career mode, decent, as it was in Rugby League Live 4 because it didn't change. Introduced the star player career mode. Introduced the rookie player career mode. I like both of those modes. It sort of expanded what you could do in Rugby League games. I respect that. We'll move on now to Rugby League Live 4 because it's essentially the same game. Why does Rugby League Live 4 finish above? Well, I just said it. They actually scanned player faces, and if a player was at least a first grade NRL player at the time, they would resemble that player. And although the graphics weren't great, you could at least make out who you were playing as. And for a Rugby League game, the player graphics were decent. And that's why Rugby League Live 3 finishes 5th and Rugby League Live 4 finishes 4th. In 3rd, we have Rugby League 3. I feel like a lot of people would have this a bit lower. It was exclusive to the Nintendo Wii, so not as many people would have had it, I don't believe. But it was the 3rd installment in the Rugby League franchise. I know Rugby League 2, Rugby League 2 World Cup Edition came out in 2008 after the original version came out in 2005, which is 5 years later. Essentially the same game except updated for the 2008 season, which of course was the centenary season for the NRL and included the 2008 World Cup. Now, it had been 5 years. This came out in early 2010, so 5 years since we had an updated Rugby League game. Maybe this is why it was so good. Essentially, the gameplay obviously different because it was on the Wii, but the look of the game was essentially the same, other than it being 2009 rosters instead of 2005. But the career mode, the franchise mode, was expanded on that little bit. It was changed so it had that different feel to it, whereas Rugby League 2 and Rugby League 2 World Cup Edition did not really have that different feel. It was refreshing after 5 years to finally have a different feeling career mode, and that's why I've got it in 3rd. It expanded a little bit, and will go on to be expanded further in the Rugby League Live franchise. So yeah, that's why I've got Rugby League 3 in third, a really enjoyable career mode. Coming in at second, well, there's only two left. It's either of the twos. It's either Rugby League 2 or Rugby League Live 2. The two's the second installment of either of the franchises, seem to be the best. And for this one, Rugby League Live 2 comes in at number 2. Just the most enjoyment I had was playing this game growing up from 2012 until 2015, 3 years later when they brought in Rugby League Live 3. And I'll be honest, once Rugby League Live 3 came out, after about a year, I probably went back to Rugby League Live 2 until Rugby League Live 4 came out. The career mode, probably the most expansive in any Rugby League game. The graphics were decent for certain players, not to the same extent as Rugby League Live 4, but if you're a star player, you probably had that face model and you were recognisable. I just thought the dynamics of it, the gameplay itself, the only thing wrong with the gameplay was the intercept. It's still a bug today. I've played the game recently. I've played all these games recently so I could do this list, but the intercept is a real issue. It seems if you go for a long pass, it's a 50-50. Either you're going to get it to your winger and you've got a clear road to the try line, or it's going to get intercepted and there's no chance you're going to catch that sucker and they're going to score a try. So Rugby League Live 2, other than that intercept feature, probably the dynamics of the gameplay itself were the most fun, and the career mode probably the most expansive to this point. I like the fact that you wait till the end of the year for all teams to sign players. I know that's not realistic, but in terms of the game, that was the best. I think that might have been the first year too. They implemented realistic salary caps as well, and you had actual proper negotiations back and forth with players, and it was nice, just sort of the graphics. Once you had finished your signing business for the end of the year, they showed you your incoming and outgoing players, and if you had incoming players, they showed the little graphic of the player in your team's jersey. I did really like that, and again, just the fun dynamics to play with. So coming in at number 2, it's 2012's Rugby League Live 2. Number 1 now, it's pretty obvious what it is. It is Rugby League 2. Came out in 2005. Many people around my age would agree that this is the best Rugby League console game, and even people who are a bit older than myself, the Andrew Voss commentary is iconic. Straight down the hay diddle. Whilst overall, I'd admit, Rugby League Live 2 is probably a better game, the nostalgia is there for me with Rugby League 2. I played it for years, all the way until Rugby League 3 essentially came out. And of course, Rugby League 2 World Cup Edition was in there, but it's essentially the same game with updated rosters. And of course, a World Cup mode. Rugby League 2, the nostalgia, but it was also genuinely a good game. It was a fun game to play. And you know what? For the time, another reason why it's number 1. You compare Rugby League games to all the other franchises across the world, right? FIFA, which I love. FIFA's personally my favourite franchise. FIFA, Madden, NBA 2K, NBA Live, whatever. At the time, Rugby League 2 as a game wasn't necessarily better, but it held up. It was at least in the realm of being as good as a FIFA, Madden, or NBA game at the time. You can't say that about later versions of Rugby League games. As good as some of them may be, they're nowhere near as good, and it's because they have nowhere near the same budget as other games. But Rugby League 2 didn't have the same budget as any of those games, but they made it work. As I've said all through this video, career mode was my big thing, or franchise mode back then. The franchise mode in Rugby League 2 wasn't too dissimilar to an NBA Live 05, or a Madden 05, or an NBA 2K 5, or a FIFA 05. In terms of the actual career modes themselves, they were around the same level. And again, the gameplay was fun in Rugby League 2. That's what gets it over the line for me. That's why it's the best Rugby League game of all time. As they say, there you have it. Every Rugby League console game ranked from worst to best. I know there are definitely people out there who disagree with me, so in the comments I want you to drop from worst to best your rankings of the Rugby League console games. Let me know also what you want me to rank next. I'm looking to do more of these ranking videos and get more YouTube content out there. What I'm thinking of at the moment next is ranking every Rugby League World Cup, as in less than 12 months we've got the next Rugby League World Cup, the 2021 World Cup, which will take place in 2022. So let me know, are you interested in seeing that? I'm going to do it eventually, but if you guys are keen, I'm thinking that'll be the next ranked video. So let me know anyway. Other than that, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Rugby League in my opinion on YouTube. I'll see you next time.